you have this capitalist system where the generation of capital is this just kind of juggernautical force that's just pushing us forward, and so on. It's very, very hard to stop, to the point where people have said it's easier to imagine an end to civilization than an end to capitalism.
Thank you for joining the Transform Impossible, which is India's first future tech podcast. And today, I'm really delighted to have Mr. Phil Torres, who studies existential risk. He's an affiliate scholar at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology. He's a freelance writer at Motherboard, Vice Media. He was a research assistant for Ray Kurzweil, was the contributor at the Future of Life Institute, and is the founding director of the Risk Institute. He has authored various books such as Human Extinction, Morality, Foresight, and Human Flourishing, plus The End, all of them centering or talking about existential threats and risk facing humanity. So Phil, really appreciate you taking time being part of the podcast. So before we get into the human extinction bit, I would like to talk about the fancy part, because Ray Kurzweil, I guess everybody talks about him because singularity and stuff like that. So how was the experience working with Ray Kurzweil?
Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's really lovely to be here. So it's basically he, a couple years ago, he started working on a new book, which was somewhat hilariously titled "The Singularity is Nearer." So obviously it's a follow-up to his 2005 book, Singularity is Near. And so he recruited a bunch of people to help him basically fact check certain claims that he was making in the book, and to elaborate certain ideas. So I didn't have much. It sounds more glamorous than it was. I didn't have much direct interaction with him. Most of the interaction goes through his assistant.
Besides Ray Kurzweil, you've also been a contributing writer for Future of Life Institute, Max Tegmark. So how's that experience been?
Yeah, so I did that several years ago. So I wrote for them for maybe a year, and it was really fun. A lot of the people associated with Future of Life Institute, I like a lot and have a lot of respect for, and they've. I'm excited to be a part of an institute or to have been affiliated with this institute in the past that is, sort of like on the vanguard of thinking seriously about the threats associated with emerging technologies like, lethal autonomous drones in particular. They've made that a topic that they're very passionate about. And, they for example, helped to produce this video called Slaughterbots, which attempts to illustrate vividly the various hazards associated with, drones that could be programmed to behave in a coordinated swarm manner, and then, eliminate targets like, assassinate people and so on. And this technology is kind of right around the corner, temporally speaking. And I think that's really important work. And the idea that we need to increase awareness with a sense of urgency of the possibility of these global scale, unprecedented hazards, I think is like really important work. I've also become increasingly critical of certain aspects of the existential risk framework, but nonetheless, I think that historically speaking, the amount of scholarly attention, or public attention, or political attention, so on, that has focused on these global transgenerational issues is minuscule. There really hasn't been a lot of work. So I'm a huge advocate of promoting the general notion that, of existential risk, of, these hazards that could, be calamitous in a way that no past, event in human history, 300,000 years has been, maybe with one exception of the Toba catastrophe, which was a supervolcanic eruption about 75,000 years ago, that probably may very well have resulted in a population bottleneck of about 1,000 breeding pairs of Homo sapiens in the past. But other than that, and obviously that's not something that is in our cultural memory. So other than that, yeah, we have entered this qualitatively new epoch in which we do seem to be vulnerable to threats that are more perilous than anything we've encountered before. And that's important for people to start thinking about. So thinking seriously about these issues. Yeah.
Completely fair that, we need to think about what technology could do. It's a double-edged sword. Somehow, all of the emerging technology at this point in time is it's at its nascent stage, because we're just kind of discovering the possibilities of what it can do. Yes, we definitely need to have a conversation on the downside of it. But the positive sides are so loaded that I am really excited. And that's the reason I have this conversation. And most of my podcast is largely on the benefits of technology. I do get into the downsides of the technology, but largely I stick to the benefits of technology. I do know that, artificial intelligence, once it actually matures, could be an existential threat, and so could be maybe like synthetic biology or nanotechnology or any of these technology. But there is, if humanity kind of directs it, we could maybe direct it into a way where it could be largely beneficial to mankind. What are your views on something like that?
Yeah, I think you're getting at the deepest issue here, which is there's the director, I think co-founder of the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute, which is kind of based in New York City. Seth Baum, he published a paper in which he described this as the great downside dilemma. And it's a nice term that, on the one hand, the promise of all sorts of emerging technologies like CRISPR-Cas9 and gene drives and molecular nanotechnology and AI and so on. The potential benefits are truly staggering in terms of their goodness, and I don't think it's unrealistic, quixotic utopian thinking to imagine the eradication of diseases, infectious diseases, as well as diseases that have some genetic basis, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and so on. And perhaps even the ineffective means for slowing down senescence or aging. So that there's really is a tremendous amount of promise. I am convinced of that. But the thing is, with these emerging technologies, they're so powerful, and many of them are getting more and more accessible to small groups and to individuals. And on top of that, the good and bad uses, the beneficial and harmful ways of utilizing these technologies is just inextricable. And so I feel like it's important also to recognize that the hazards really could be, catastrophic. And so on the one hand, like CRISPR-Cas9, there are all sorts of diseases that this could potentially cure, but at the same time, there could be an individual group, a lone wolf, and so on, who basically saves up $1,000, builds a biohacker laboratory in their basement or their garage or whatever, and then maybe has the tools, the synthetic biological tools, to synthesize a designer pathogen that is extremely lethal and really contagious and so on. And there are a lot of people who study existential risk who are especially worried about the possibility of an engineered pandemic. So, and I think really the question that is unanswered and is the profound issue that we need collectively, and then scholars or whatever, to really get a good handle on is what are the relative peril, what is the ratio of peril and promise, and are these technologies ultimately worth it? Or to put the issue, the point differently, is pursuing the development of these technologies, because of all of the immense benefits, is that going to lead to disaster? And there is one of the hypotheses proposed to explain why it is that when we look up at the firmament at night, and there's no evidence at all of extraterrestrial intelligences out there. There are no signals. There are no spaceships, or at least there's no good evidence of this being the case. One explanation is that maybe life, simple life and complex life, actually is really abundant in the universe. But these life forms figure out how to develop powerful technologies, and then basically when they reach roughly our level of development, because we're right on the cusp of becoming multiplanetary and spacefaring, and in some significant sense, that right as they get to our level, they self-destruct. So this is the doomsday hypothesis, and I think there is really something to be said for this, and I worry a lot that the positive aspects of dual use emerging technologies are seductive and are sort of like pulling us in their direction, and perhaps in the end, actually the result will be some kind of existential catastrophe. So right. I don't know that for sure, but that is the concern, and ultimately the point of studying this topic. It's the point of
maybe you
studying
can prepare.
It is exactly.
Right. Yeah. I think you opened up so many interesting things. Technology, like you rightfully pointed out, I think is in for the first time in human history has got democratized. Yeah, it's become really accessible, even to smaller groups. You could be sitting in Nigeria, you could be sitting in Bangladesh, you could be sitting in America. You've got the same knowledge, which is, freely available over the internet. There is two ways to look at technology. The future, either it could be utopian or dystopian. That's normally when we look at, we say that either it's like a utopian future or it could be a dystopian future. But why can't it be a protopian future where we kind of have a mix of both? Because I think both of them are too, maybe might not work. Either it's too fairy tale or too dark. Why can't we have something in the middle? Do you think humanity can create a future which is like right now a protopian future, which has got the best of both the worlds?
I like the notion of protopia. That because historically speaking, the magnetic pull towards utopia has at times led to all sorts of atrocities. So I think there's something to be said about being at least wary and skeptical and circumspect about the utopian ideologies, including techno-utopian ideologies. Kind of maybe Ray Kurzweil's, someone could criticize, I think, his kind of singularitarian view about, the singularity in 2045 and so on. But I think the worry is that there are kind of three things come to mind. One is that moving forward, getting the balance of good and bad may become increasingly difficult. On the one hand, there's like just climate change and biodiversity and loss and stuff, and that's just a threat multiplier and a threat intensifier. I've called that before. I feel like a good term is something like a frame risk, like a type of risk that that frames our general existential predicament in the sense that it can modulate the probability of other risks, like nuclear conflict or terrorism or something like that. And then In addition, you've got the possibility of artificial superintelligence. And there are some arguments that I think are generally pretty strong for the outcome of the creation of artificial superintelligence either being genuinely kind of pretty utopian, like really good, if we manage to figure out how to get its values, the values that motivate its behaviors in the world, to align with our values, whatever that means exactly. We may need to solve some perennial philosophical problems to actually solve this problem. So people are worried about it. But on the other hand, maybe it would just ultimately, destroy humanity, not because it's evil or because it's malicious or anything like that, but simply its goals are just misaligned and its problem-solving capacities are far transcend, the best, the capacities of the best, the smartest humans. And then I feel like the third issue. So there's the environmental, why are things? Well, I'm trying to explain why I'm worried that getting that balance between good and bad is going to be tough. One, there's climate change or environmental degradation. Two is that artificial intelligence that could ruin everything potentially. And then the third is just that growing power and accessibility of dual use emerging technologies like biotechnology and nanotechnology, drone technology, and even geoengineering. Some of this geoengineering interventions that could have global scope could potentially be precipitated by just a billionaire, single wealthy individual or something. And so there's actually a paper that I oftentimes cite, written by a guy named John Sotos, and I believe it's called Biotechnology and the Lifetime of Technical Civilizations. But basically, all he does is just crunch the numbers. It says, okay, look, even if there's a tiny percentage, like a really, really, really small percentage, that any given individual on Earth per decade will successfully initiate a devastating global pandemic or something, then all you have to do is just look at, okay, there's going to be 10 billion people on the planet. And, you crunch the numbers, and it looks like the probability of doom approaches 100% over pretty, short timescales, decades or centuries or whatever. So, yeah, the fact that, as you mentioned, these technologies are democratizing unprecedented powers to change the world for good, which is wonderful, but also for ill. That this means that it might actually be really difficult to avoid kind of a dystopian future. I mean, there are people like Nick Bostrom at the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, who has suggested that if we invent a technology that makes it easy for small groups and single individuals to unilaterally devastate the civilization, and we may already have this technology in CRISPR-Cas9 and gene drives and so on right now, then we may need to implement ubiquitous, super invasive, real-time surveillance of every person on the planet. And he seems kind of okay with this possibility, but obviously a lot of people read that and are horrified because that looks like a dystopian nightmare in and of itself. But I think his point is, in which I had actually made in a book chapter earlier, pretty much the exact same point, is that it's difficult to imagine how it is we maintain existential security moving forward in a world with these democratizing technologies if we don't have mass surveillance. So it seems like we're racing towards this future that it looks like all of the options available to us are not
will lead us to there only, no matter what we do there. Because I mean, you're saying the only option which Nick Bostrom which gave, you saying that is the only framework which does look good, and that's mass surveillance. In the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned that you were critical of the existential risk framework. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
So historically speaking, the idea that humanity could has the capacity to self-annihilate, it somewhat unsurprisingly emerged after the atomic age began in 1945, and especially after 1954, which was the Castle Bravo disaster. That was a thermonuclear test in the Marshall Islands that produced an explosive yield 2.5 times greater than what the physicists calculated. And it caused this big international incident with some Japanese fishermen who were downwind, and various people on islands also who were downwind in terms of radioactive fallout. But then also it spread, that radioactive fallout had global reach. So there were radioactive particles detected all around the planet. Anyways, so the point is that convinced a lot of philosophers and scientists that self-annihilation, that there really is a kill mechanism capable of potentially destroying humanity, namely even maybe perhaps a small-scale thermonuclear war, which just render Earth's surface uninhabitable. So, the point of saying that is the initial focus was really human extinction, and then with Bostrom, in particular, Nick Bostrom in the early 2000s, he sort of shifted the focus towards any scenario, any kind of disaster scenario that would prevent humanity from attaining our potential. So obviously human extinction is one way that could happen, but also there are survivable scenarios that would be just as catastrophic when the focus of your analysis is this notion of our potential. So what is our potential? People may answer in all sorts of different ways depending on their particular worldviews and ideologies and philosophical ethical commitments and so on. But for Bostrom and a lot of the people who are based around Oxford, who adopted this view called long-termism, our potential really has to do with spreading, very spreading throughout the universe, and trying to create as much value as possible. And by value, you could imagine just like kind of pleasure or happiness. So the idea is that you're supposed to take the perspective of the universe itself, look down on humanity, and the all of the rest of the cosmic future, which goes to 10 to the 40 years from now or something, some huge number. That's how long the universe will remain habitable. And according to Bostrom, what we need to do, it's our moral obligation to flood this region of called our future light cone with as much value as possible. Value is understood in this very impersonal sense. And so they're kind of like, when you look carefully at this view, there are lots of kind of problems and like really disturbing implications. For example, he has argued that, the reduction, the slight reductions, negligible reductions in the probability that we will fail to achieve this kind of techno-utopian future of astronomical value is the moral equivalent of billions and billions and billions of actual human lives. So if you were sitting in front of two buttons and you had to choose between the two, Bostrom would say, and a lot of long-termists would say, push the button to reduce existential risk because of all of this future value in our light cone, sacrifice the billions and billions of people. And so a lot of people feel uncomfortable with that. And there's a worry that if this this mode of moral reasoning were to become influential in the real world, and there was actually a politician who had a button, that said sacrifice millions or billions of people for tiny reductions in existential risk, you might end up with, kind of like a series of catastrophes that that would be harmful to actual people for the sake of not the national interest, but the cosmic interest, the ultimate moral interest of the universe itself.
Humanity's progress, will it only lead towards doom and gloom, or do we have? Is there a way out of this where we could all survive? We could create a better future? It looks highly unlikely because capitalism itself is a zero-sum game. Is there a framework which could, mitigate this problem? Maybe create a future which does not lead towards an existential threat? Do you see a scenario possible, probable?
I feel like this definitely ties back into just, this is to use this silly cliche, like the $1 million question, the ultimate profound conundrum that we're working through right now. This is part of the reason I think it's actually useful to think seriously and think creatively about the ways that humanity could destroy itself in order to devise efficacious strategies for preventing that outcome. So what comes to mind immediately is a lot of people point to space colonization as a way of protecting, and the idea is like pretty simple. And I feel like the argument at first glance is compelling. It's basically just if a species is spread out geographically on Earth, then the likelihood is lower that a single disaster is going to wipe out every single member. And so therefore, if humanity spreads out cosmographically through the solar system and beyond, then we should also be protected from planetary scale disasters and so on. So and my sense is that this is kind of the go-to strategy, macro strategy for ensuring our continued survival in the universe. But I've also, and this is an idea that I very much championed excitedly for the longest time. And then I read this book by Johns Hopkins professor of international relations named Daniel Dewdney, called Dark Skies. And that completely changed my view. Basically, he examined in a quite sophisticated manner what exactly would the interplanetary political dynamics be if we established Earth-independent colonies on Mars. And it turns out it's pretty hard to imagine how things wouldn't kind of get pretty dangerous, and how there wouldn't be conflict. And also, if there were conflict, how it wouldn't be the case that Mars would have a much bigger advantage. So, for example, they're like much closer to the asteroid belt. Asteroids can be redirected at Earth, and some scholars have called these planetoid bombs, and they would have an explosive yield due simply to, as a result of just the kinetic energy just slamming into Earth, much, much greater than nuclear weapons or thermonuclear weapons. So it's the more I've thought about it, the more convinced I've been that actually probably space colonization is not a good option. Eventually, in 800 million years, as the sun's luminosity grows to the point where it starts to boil the oceans on Earth, then we will need to leave the planet. But we've got plenty of time, to figure out how to go about doing that in a way that doesn't maybe engender even more, existential hazard to humanity. So, other than that, another option would be relinquishing entire fields of technology. And the downside, to reference Seth Baum's term mentioned earlier, is that if you say, well, these technologies are just so risky that we just shouldn't develop them, then you forego all of the potential benefits. I mean, there is a lot of human suffering that potentially could be alleviated if we do develop these technologies, and there are reasons for anticipating the human condition being ameliorated, and in all sorts of wonderful ways. So, but maybe, I mean, it's an idea that I am not a Luddite or neo-Luddite, who just has a dispositional aversion or dislike to technology. Not at all. But this possibility of relinquishment is something that I kind of take seriously, because my sense is that the chance of self-annihilation is so huge. It might be worth mentioning here that there are pretty much every serious scholar who has really taken the time to think hard about these issues tends to believe that the probability of either civilizational collapse or human extinction this century is very significant. For example, the Future of Humanity Institute in 2008 conducted this informal survey at a conference, and median probability of human extinction this century was 19%. And that sort of aligns, Bostrom has said the same thing. Lord Martin Rees, who co-founded the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at University of Cambridge, wrote in 2003 that civilization probably has, he estimated has a 50-50 chance of making it through this century. And there's so many others whose opinions I think are worth taking seriously, who have come to similar conclusions. You have this capitalist system where the generation of capital is this just kind of juggernautical force that's just pushing us forward, and so on. It's very, very hard to stop, to the point where, people have said it's easier to imagine an end to civilization than an end to capitalism. Other people have talked about differential technological development. Maybe there's a way that we can engineer the arrival time of different technologies so that the technology we need to make another technology safer arrives before that other technology is actually fully developed. There's also feasibility questions surrounding that. But otherwise, this is a question of macro strategy that is very much on the minds of people interested in this topic, and it's a hugely underdeveloped issue. So I don't have really any good answers. Mass surveillance, space colonization, broad relinquishment, none of those look particularly good or particularly practical.
Yes, technology, I think, is that tool which can create human evolution, but I guess we definitely do not have an answer of technology growing out of hand. Could you, talk about, which are the areas which you are really concerned about, which could be of the existential threat?
Yeah, I think the definitely engineered pandemics is very worrisome. There was one report. I'm borrowing this idea from a Global Challenges Foundation report from a few years ago, but it's not inconceivable. It's not possible now, but within the relative near or foreseeable future, it could be possible to synthesize a virus that combines the lethality of rabies, the incurability of Ebola, the contagiousness of the common cold, and then as I mentioned before, the long incubation period of HIV or something. And that would really be a kind of worst case scenario.
Yeah. And I don't think people take these kind of conversations seriously. I think, there has to be some kind of a framework. But then, when as soon as you talk about the possibility of these technologies going out of hand, then the entire world, huddles up and says, yeah, okay, let's block this technology. What that does is maybe that takes away the opportunity of what those technology could bring right now. Because at this point in time, we just understanding CRISPR-Cas9, suddenly we also have now something called as CRISPR on, CRISPR off editing, which is extremely precise, and which could really create so much benefits. Progeria is being treated, sickle cell anemia. There's so many diseases which could be treated, and that could be because there's so much pain and suffering in the world, which possibly could be eliminated with this. So there is this one side of me which says we need to progress at the speed of light, put our money where our mouth is for R&D and develop technology so that we can build a better future. But you're saying with the growth of technology and because it's become accessible to everyone, there always is a chance that when it goes in the hands of fringe, something bad could happen, is what you're saying.
I'm not making any of these claims dogmatically, or certainly don't mean to suggest at all that this is the end of the conversation. It's the beginning. During the Cold War, a bunch of philosophers and theorists who had addressed this very issue because they were worried about the totalitarianism of the Soviet Union. And some of them were quite explicit that we really should prefer extinction over the loss, loss of our dignity and freedom, and so, and others push back against that. Actually, survival is better even if we're in degraded situations. So, for example, Bertrand Russell said, much better to pick survival than in a totalitarian state than the opposite. Better red than dead is the saying that he popularized. But the other thing to emphasize here that I haven't mentioned so far is there could be some kind of consideration that hasn't occurred to anyone. And so part of the reason it's important that we encourage scholars and young people and members of the public to think seriously, to work through these topics, is there could be something that goes, oh, actually there is an alternative way forward. Right. That is that you sort of get, you can have your cake and you can eat it too. Right. And so, so I'm not sure. I certainly, I don't like dogmatism either way. The sort of technophilic, we have to have technology at all costs, but also the neo-Luddite stuff on the other side. I want to choose my position really just based on the best arguments. And sometimes I'm sort of pushed in one direction. Other times I'm pushed in, towards technology, away from technology. And we just need more research to figure out really to have a more robust sense of the pros and cons of different strategies moving forward, of developing different technologies and so on.
With the conversation that I've had with you, I mean, wherever you poke, you end up with an existential threat. It seems like there is, like you said, but then maybe you need more minds to come in, and maybe there could be a possible, like a scenario where we could kind of escape this. So I'm positive, I'm hopeful, because so what comes next for Mr. Phil Torres?
Well, recently I've been writing a really long book on the history of thinking about human extinction, and not just the history of how our understanding of the general existential predicament has changed over time. Like, is it possible? Logically possible for humanity to go extinct? Is it physically possible? What's the probability, and so on? But also then the moral thinking about the topic, which is just incredibly recent. I mean, really, 1950s was kind of the first sustained look at the ethics and the value issues having to related to human extinction. And then just over the past 20 years, you've seen just a growing number of philosophers take this topic seriously, but it's still just a very small number. So there's lots of work left to be done on that topic. So anyways, that's something I've been focusing on a lot. But I also think a lot about these days, like geoengineering, and which very much ties into exactly the crux of the issues that we've been talking about. Like, is more technology what's needed? Maybe. I think there's a good case to be made that there are technological fixes that could save us, but also I think there are good arguments for why maybe we don't need more technology. And so it's trying to navigate this complicated and high stakes issue is something that I'm really invested in right now, and I don't know where I'll land ultimately in terms of my conclusions, but I'm also really hopeful. I mean, I want it to be the case. I very much want it to be the case that we are able to exploit all of the to utilize to fully realize all of those good potential uses of technology, while somehow figuring out, without just having to go to Mars or implement, global surveillance system, so figure out how to neutralize all of the bad effects. And, there's an urgency to this topic, but hopefully we'll solve it moving forward. Because I agree that well, I don't want to repeat the point too much, but I mean, it's the promise really is, quite significant and something to be very excited about. But that dark side it's ominous and profound and formidable, and it keeps me up at night. So,
right. Thank you, Phil. Yeah. Really appreciate you taking time being part of this conversation. I mean, yes, it is scary where we are going, but with change, as a human race, I mean, evolution, we are constantly evolving. I guess that's the only way we know to let go of things which could transform mankind. It's a little difficult to kind of hang on to that, but yes, if you understand technology a little deeply, that without doubt almost all of those technologies someday will bring us to a doom and gloom scenario. And no matter what we do, that's the place where we end up, is what looks like right now to me, and anybody who's invested really deeply in technology will understand that eventually it's got the possibilities of going out of hand. But I hope that maybe, like you said, maybe there could be answers which we have not really looked at, where we are maybe missing out because, so maybe there could be people who could kind of come in and maybe figure those answers. Because I guess the only thing beautiful about this humongous universe is this blue dot, this Earth, and it's us, the people, that makes this place beautiful. That the only intelligent species, if I may say, yes, but the only intelligent species also has the capability of destroying not just the blue dot, but the entire universe also. And yes, so yeah, it's a weird, but I hope and I wish and I pray that somehow we move out from a capitalist frame of society and kind of figure out, we break our silos and come together. Maybe that could be a way to kind of address these huge questions and find answers which could maybe have a brighter future for mankind. So in that note, Thank you. Really appreciate you being part of Transform Impossible podcast. Would you like to have one last note?
maybe just that you mentioned, we live on this pale blue dot amidst the, an inscrutable vastness of our cosmic abode. And one of the reasons some philosophers have said we need to preserve humanity is precisely because we may very well be this unique entity in the entire universe. And, there's something there is something deeply sad, I think, about the loss of this little bit of the universe that is capable of looking about, experiencing awe and wonder and starting to understand the nature of the universe itself. And so, yeah, hopefully, we will figure out a way moving forward to, preserve this little, bit of specialness in the cosmos.
Thanks a lot, Phil. I think you're the only conversation where I have had where I've left it halfway through. Maybe we could do a second round and later on, maybe a couple of years, and see where this stands. Yeah. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
That sounds great.
To my listeners, if you like what you see in here, please press the subscribe button. Until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you.